Do you have a hard time controlling how much food you eat? Is it actually possible to trick yourself into eating less? Hi, I'm Dr. Sabali Pal, professor in bariatric medicine. In my career, I've published over 90 papers in peer-reviewed journals and received millions of dollars worth of funding to conduct clinical trials in the areas of nutrition and chronic disease. I've also coached thousands of people over many years and tried truckloads of diets myself. And given that I love my food so much, any research study that investigates how to eat less without feeling deprived is always on my radar. Well, researchers have recently discovered a fascinating new way to eat less and lose weight. First, let me put this into context. Eating behavior is regulated by various signals and interactions between organs, hormones, tissues, and neurotransmitters. However, research has shown that appetite is regulated by psychological cues such as memories of recently consumed meals, which can dictate subsequent food intake. This is called the meal recall effect, where thinking about a recently eaten meal can influence the eating behavior of your current meal. For example, researchers found that participants ate fewer cookies in the experiment when they were asked to visualize a recently eaten meal compared to participants who were asked to recall a meal they had eaten the day before. So the idea is that it has to be a recent meal that you're thinking about. These experiments have been repeated, not just cookies, but popcorn and other food types. Studies have also found recalling certain recently consumed drink compared to recalling a drink consumed the previous day also led to a reduction in the subsequent intake of another drink, suggesting the meal recall effect is not specific to a particular type of food. It can be related to drink as well. A study reported a 40% decrease in the intake of current meals in those who recalled a recent meal just before they started eating compared to those who recalled a non-food event. It's amazing that just thinking about your previous meal has such a significant effect on how much you're going to eat. That just blows me away. However, the problem with all these studies that have been done in this field is that there's a lot of variability in the results, whereby the meal recall effect has been shown to reduce subsequent food intake anywhere from 14.5% to 53.6%. Therefore, if one can figure out what factors could potentially increase the meal recall effect, then these strategies could be optimized for weight loss and weight management. And before you get too carried away with excitement, it's not as straightforward as it sounds. Researchers have found that if there's a long time between the previous meal compared to the current meal, then the meal recall doesn't work to reduce food consumption, meaning you need to be thinking about a recently eaten meal that day. Inducing a positive mood in participants disrupts the effect as well. Verbally recalling a meal memory, like saying it out loud, doesn't seem to work either. You need to be visualizing it. Asking participants to recall their meal in too much detail, like describing the textures and flavors, also backfires and promotes hunger instead. Others have also found when participants were prompted to elaborate details about their recent meal, their snack intake increased compared to those who were not asked to elaborate on their recollections. So, in a nutshell, for this meal recall effect to be prompted, an individual must recall the act of having eaten the meal rather than simply thinking about the food. I'll explain what this means in a second. The present study I'm about to discuss investigated whether asking people to visualize having eaten a larger meal than they would have actually decreased the number of biscuits that they ate subsequently. Briefly, all 150 participants were first served a fixed portion of food for lunch. The participants returned 3 hours later and listened to an audio recording of a visualization task. They were asked to close their eyes, listen to the clip, and mentally imagine the events described. Each participant was randomly assigned to one of 5 visualization conditions. 1, the recall plus enlargement group recalled their most recent meal and imagined it was bigger and more filling or satiating than it really was. The recall and rumination group also recalled a recent meal and visualized its consumption in great detail, like taste, smell, texture, etc. But most importantly, the size of the meal was asked not to be altered in their visualization. The remaining conditions were all control groups. The recall and handling group recalled a recent meal and imagined moving it around the plate, and the food picture and handling group and the non-picture and handling group. In the last two, they were asked not to remember their recent meal. Instead, they were shown a photograph of a novel food or some stationery that they were asked to describe. They then visualized moving the food or the stationery around in the plate during the audio clip. The participants all spent about 2 minutes on this visualization exercise. After this mental exercise, the participants were then told they were free to eat as many biscuits as they wished, since it was mentioned that the biscuits would be thrown out at the end of the session for hygiene reasons. Most importantly, they weren't told that it was actually part of the experiment. So as you can see by this graph, when participants were asked to recall their lunch as bigger than it really was, they ate 32% fewer biscuits, which translated to about 122 fewer calories being consumed compared to the other groups. Moreover, just recalling the previous meal without pretending it was bigger could also reduce daily energy intake by about 14.5%, which is still substantial. So recalling a recent meal and then pretending it was bigger was a very effective method of reducing biscuit intake, and a meaningful behavior in the context of weight reduction and weight management. Funnily enough, after they had finished eating the biscuits, participants were asked not to pretend and really estimate the actual size of the lunch meal they'd eaten 4 hours before. They recalled it as smaller than it truly was, so they all knew the difference between pretending and reality. So how does this happen, you ask? When we eat, a number of things happen in our bodies. For example, looking at the food, chewing the food, and digesting the food all send satiety signals, or in other words, fullness signals to our brains to say that we're full and stop eating. Well, surprisingly, just pretending to themselves was enough to activate the same satiety signals in the participants that were originally activated during the previous lunch session. It was interesting that the participants didn't actually have to believe that the meal was bigger. The researchers also speculated that imagining the previous meal was larger and more filling acted as a mental preload, even though it wasn't really consumed. And if you don't know what a preload is, watch my previous video where I explain how drinking water can act as a preload before a meal, because it can fill you up and subsequently decrease how much you consume in the meal. So what this means is just simply thinking about your previous meal starts to turn on your satiety signals as if you were really eating, and that fills you up. Moreover, this technique also enhances interoception, which is our ability to feel our bodily signals. Mindful eating works similarly, where one is aware of all the satiety signals that the body produces. For example, when you mindfully eat, you smell the food, look at the food, and aware of the chewing and the tasting of each mouthful of food. So when your senses are heightened in this way, you are totally immersed in what you're eating. Then it's been shown that you will eat less because you feel fuller sooner, as you have activated all your satiety or your fullness signals in your body. In contrast, if you don't eat mindfully because you're too busy talking to someone, scrolling through your phone on social media, or watching TV, then studies have found that you will overeat because satiety signals have not been fully activated. So this is why in this study, imagining eating food induced feelings of fullness and subsequent decreased biscuit intake. So the next time you sit for an evening meal, maybe you can think about the lunch you ate 6 hours ago, imagine it being bigger, and seeing if it helps you eat less. I hope this video has helped you out and given you a new strategy in your toolbox that might help you out to manage your weight. Have a look at last week's video in which I examined how to fix skinny fat. But to really get the results you want, make sure you come back to next week's video where I'm going to discuss the pitfalls of taking Ozempic. I think you might be surprised when you hear about some of the new research studies coming out on this. This is Dr. Cibele Powell. See you next week. Please don't forget to support my channel, and so I can continue to make my informative videos by liking and subscribing. Thank you.